I try to give you a Flashpoint geo-prophecy update and to try to keep you apprised of what's going on in the Middle East. And wow, it's just moving fast and furious. And that's if you're looking at the Middle East. Most Americans today are focused really on our own domestic issues and our upcoming elections. But I want to direct your attention overseas primarily. But everything in the world you should know is interconnected, and there's nothing that really happens in complete isolation. But I want to direct your attention to the Middle East, and specifically something that took place a little less than a month ago now, and it was the Jamal Khashoggi murder, which took place in Istanbul. So I'm entitling this Flashpoint Geo-Prophecy Update, The Khashoggi Murder and Its Impact on the Middle East. If you're not familiar with it, I'll take just a moment. It was really big news, and it still is, and it continues to linger on. I think if it were not for our U.S. elections, you'd be hearing a lot more about this incident. Jamal Khashoggi, what we first learned about him is essentially that he was a writer, a journalist, and he is a Saudi national. He was a citizen of Saudi Arabia. He was very tight with the Saudi monarchy, the ruling party, or those who rule over Saudi Arabia. And many believe that not only was he tight with the monarchy, but he knew all the deep, dark secrets of the monarchy of Saudi Arabia. And he, for a while, was kind of working together with them and was very knowledgeable about the issues related to how Saudi Arabia was run, what the monarchy was doing, the kings, the crown princes. But then he kind of has taken a turn, or had taken a turn after that, and became a critic of Saudi Arabia. And he was a journalist, so he was writing and taking issue with the new crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who's 33 years of age, and a lot of his reforms and the things that he wanted to do with Saudi Arabia. So Jamal Khashoggi, this journalist, exiled himself, really it's self-exile, to the United States for his own safety, because he was taking issue with the monarchy in Saudi Arabia. And he began to write, continue his writing, and he wrote for the Washington Post. So he was a journalist for the Washington Post. What led up to the events tied to his murder is that he was about to divorce his former wife and remarry. He needed some paperwork, is what we're told. And in order to get that paperwork, he went to Istanbul in Turkey, and he went into the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. And you may have seen the pictures of the cameras when he was walking in, and there are no images of him ever walking out. And the discussion, the thought is, and the narrative that has been expressed in the news media is that he was murdered. And as more events came out, and you should know that most of the information that came out of this affair has been released from Turkey, because this took place in Turkey, but there's other reasons for that as well, which we'll get to in a few minutes. So he went into the consulate. He was supposedly murdered there, and it was gruesome from the things that were told, that there were Saudi agents that had flown in. In some instances, they're saying there were 15 of them. A lot of this has yet to be verified, but this is the narrative, that 15 flew in separately. These Saudi agents, some of them were supposedly very close to the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and so there's a lot of speculation that this was a premeditated hit on someone who was a critic of the crown prince and of Saudi Arabia itself and the monarchy there, and that Khashoggi was dismembered, that there was a bone saw used, that he was tortured, and the account is very gruesome, and that his body parts were actually taken out separately, piece by piece, and disposed of. But no one knows, no one has seen the body, and that's the report. Now, each of these pieces of information that I just shared with you, most of them were coming out of the Turkish government, and they were released day after day to keep the narrative going. And I would suggest to you that that was on purpose. And this is in no way am I taking sides to say one side is more wholesome than the other. So please don't misconstrue when I explain this, but you should know that there is a battle, a war, a conflict going on between many of the nations of the Middle East. And there is one significant battle that's taking place, a war between, not a war where you can see it with bullets and guns necessarily all the time, but a war between Turkey and Saudi Arabia for who is going to be the dominant player of the Middle East. Remember, these countries go back a long, long time. Their history is far longer. It goes back much further than the United States of America. These countries and the peoples that live there remember history. So when you're talking about conflicts in the Middle East, you have to see it in terms of hundreds and potentially thousands of years as opposed to something that's 200 years old. So these conflicts go way back, but this specific conflict in terms of Saudi Arabia and Turkey really goes back to who is it that will best govern the Muslim world? Who will best rule over the Muslim world? Now the Saudis and the monarchy, they control the two Muslim holy sites of Mecca and Medina. Those two cities are located in Saudi Arabia today. So they are custodians of those two holy cities to Islam. However, during the Ottoman Turkish Empire from 1517 to 1917, it was dissolved at the end of the First World War, not all that long ago, the Ottoman Turks controlled the cities of Mecca and Medina and were custodians over those Muslim holy cities because the Ottoman Turks controlled most of the entire Middle East, including large portions of what is Saudi Arabia today. So President Erdogan of Turkey fancies himself or sees himself as the new sultan of the entire Middle East. He wants to be the caliph, the Khalifa of a reborn Turkish Ottoman Empire that controls that region of the world. So what is in view here is Turkey, and Erdogan, the president of Turkey, sees an opportunity here, has seen an opportunity to give Saudi Arabia and the new, young, vivacious crown prince of Saudi Arabia a big black eye, if not more, if not to depose him completely. So what this is Saudi Arabia you can make your own decision as to why it was done. It looks like it was pretty obvious that it was a dissident, someone who was opposed to the way the monarchy is running, and therefore they wanted him out of the picture. They didn't like the things he was saying. You have to understand that Saudi Arabia under the new crown prince is trying to reinvent itself, to modernize. They have something that he has instituted called Vision 2030. You really need to keep your eye on what Saudi Arabia is doing because biblically, I believe that Saudi Arabia will play a major role in the last days. I also think that Turkey will play a major role in the last days. And I tell you all these things, not because I think you should just be interested in Saudi Arabia because they have a lot of oil money or because maybe they have some influence because of it. I tell you these things because if you're reading the scriptures and the prophetic passages of scripture, these countries, I believe, will play a major role in the last days. And all of the things that we're seeing now are leading up. I can't tell you if it's 5 years away or 10 years away or 50 years away, but I really believe that the things that we're seeing are moving us rapidly towards the last days. There is a movement and a shaping of nations that's leading us to the return of Jesus Christ. Now, I want to take just a few moments to explain to you, put your thinking caps on with me here, the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a key organization in terms of helping us understand the arrangement of nations in the Middle East. So look with me, if you will, at this map, okay? And I will try to zoom in as best I can. So keep in mind that Jamal Khashoggi, this journalist for the Washington Post, you were given a narrative of him in the news media. What you probably weren't told in the news media, which was incredibly important, is that he was a major proponent of the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? Now this becomes significant. Why? Because Jamal Khashoggi, as a Muslim Brotherhood adherent and promoter of the Muslim Brotherhood, was diametrically opposed to a monarchy in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia is run by kings, a family essentially that runs Saudi Arabia. So the Muslim Brotherhood are against the monarchy, are against any government that is ruling over a Muslim nation as a monarchy or as an autocrat or as a dictator. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to see all of the Muslim nations of the world unified under one single individual leader who is religious in nature and who will run the government of all those Muslim nations according to Islamic law or Sharia law. So the Muslim Brotherhood wants to depose or get rid of any governmental organization or faction that is ruling over a Muslim nation that is not a Muslim Brotherhood adherent. Does that make sense? An example of this was when we just saw a few years ago the Arab Spring. You remember the Arab Spring? Okay. What happened in the land of Egypt? You had a dictator. Now this dictator, or you could say an autocrat, he was ruling over Egypt. His name was Mubarak, was his last name, Mubarak. Now you can say he was a dictator, he was a bad guy, but his strong arm in Egypt was holding down the rise of an Islamic government under the Muslim Brotherhood. So the fact that you may not have liked him, he was working with the West and he was holding down the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Now what happened in the Arab Spring? You had the overthrow of the dictator, Mubarak, and he was replaced by Morsi. Morsi was an adherent to the Muslim Brotherhood. So, who else is a Muslim Brotherhood adherent? The president of Turkey, Erdogan. So President Erdogan, when Egypt flipped from Mubarak, who was a dictator over the country, to Morsi, who was an adherent to the Muslim Brotherhood, all of a sudden, Turkey and President Erdogan were thrilled to be working with Egypt. They were their new best friends. As soon as Egypt flipped back away from the Muslim Brotherhood to another individual who is running it now, he is a military general, al-Sisi. Now all of a sudden Turkey is a mortal enemy of Egypt again. Okay? This is also tied to what happened in Iraq. You had Saddam Hussein was ruling over Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was essentially a dictator, right? Now when Saddam Hussein is out of the way, there is a vacuum, and you have the Muslim Brotherhood and other factions from Iran trying to move in to take control. So what you need to understand is anytime you hear about the Muslim Brotherhood, this is a pan-Islamic organization that wants to unify the Muslim nations of the world into a large caliphate of nations under one leader who will rule it based on Islamic law. Understand? That's the key component. So what are the Muslim nations today that are pro-Muslim Brotherhood? The first one and the biggest one, and where the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood is Turkey. So that's why President Erdogan of Turkey wants to be the new leader of the entire Arab world. And so his movements are calculated to ingratiate himself, for him to be liked and appreciated by Muslims throughout the entire Middle East and beyond, because he sees himself as the ruler over all of them and wants to bring back his former Ottoman Empire, which ruled the entire Middle East and ruled the areas of Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. Now, he has a major ally in the region, and you might be surprised at who this ally is. The small but very powerful and very wealthy nation of Qatar. Qatar. You see, it's a little peninsula in the Persian Gulf adjacent to Saudi Arabia. Qatar, for a while, housed the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood until Saudi Arabia said, we want them out of here, we want them off of the Arabian Peninsula, we want them moving away, or we will put all kinds of restrictions and economic hardships on you, Qatar, if you don't push the Muslim Brotherhood out of your country. And so what happened is the Muslim Brotherhood moved their headquarters from Qatar to Turkey, to Istanbul. But Qatar is still working together with Turkey. As a matter of fact, Qatar, to protect itself, said, hey, Mr. President of Turkey, can you bring me some military help? So Turkey has now created a military base in Qatar to protect Qatar from not only Iran, but from Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is so angry that they've set up a blockade against Qatar, military, economic sanctions against Qatar. And Saudi Arabia even went to the point where they made a proposal to create a canal, right across this area right here for trade and for shipping, and to create a huge toxic dump here, and to turn Qatar into an island. That's how angry Saudi Arabia is at Qatar. Why? Because Qatar is working, because Qatar controls a large portion of natural gas in the Persian Gulf. They share it with Iran. So Saudi Arabia is on the outs looking in as Qatar is making a fortune off of its natural gas reserves and sharing it with Iran. And Qatar is also unified with Turkey because of the Muslim Brotherhood. And remember, the Muslim Brotherhood wants to overthrow the Saudi monarchy. Do you understand? So you have Turkey, right here, Turkey and Qatar, who has a lot of money, working together to promote the Muslim Brotherhood. And they are also working with another country, right down here, the country of Sudan, on the Red Sea, just to the south of Egypt, Sudan. I won't get into all the details except to say that Turkey has just made a major purchase and arrangement to build a huge naval base on the Red Sea in Sudan. Essentially what they're doing, and Sudan is now becoming very pro-Muslim Brotherhood as well. So what you have, and you have to understand this is the dynamic that's being set up, is Turkey in the north, Qatar to the east of Saudi Arabia, even though it's small, it's very powerful and very wealthy, and Sudan just to the south of Egypt. Turkey is triangulating and surrounding its enemies with naval bases and military installations. Turkey to the north, of course, Qatar to the east, Sudan to the south and the west. They are surrounding two major nations, and those two major nations are anti-Muslim Brotherhood because they're run by autocrats, rulers who are not in submission to the Muslim Brotherhood. And who are those countries? Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And you can also throw in over here the United Arab Emirates on the Persian Gulf. So you have the United Arab Emirates, UAE, very wealthy, that's where Dubai is, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, non-Muslim Brotherhood countries. And then on the flip side, Turkey, Qatar, and Sudan, pro-Muslim Brotherhood nations. This is setting up a conflict, the likes of which the world has never seen before. When it will transpire, how it will continue to develop, I cannot tell you, but I can tell you that I think that it dovetails amazingly with what we're seeing in the Word of God for the future and for the last days. So I want you to be aware of it, understand that these issues, this murder of this one man is not in isolation. It is connected to a conflict between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and they're using his murder as a bargaining chip, essentially, to give the other a black eye and to diminish the other one in the eyes of the world. And all this becomes very significant in light of Donald Trump's proposal, a Palestinian-Israeli peace proposal, because Donald Trump is counting on these Arab nations, particularly Saudi Arabia, to help implement a resolution between Israel and the Palestinians. And that's a discussion for another day.
Go deeper in your understanding of God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. Zion's Fire magazine is an exceptional resource with powerful insights from Scripture that provide a clear understanding of God's ultimate plan for the last days and the return of Jesus Christ. As a first-time subscriber, you'll receive a free 1-year subscription to Zion's Fire magazine with no strings attached. Request your free subscription by visiting our website or by calling our toll-free number, and we'll send you 6 free issues, one every other month, for a full year. We depend on the generosity of viewers like you to support the ongoing production of these programs. Your donation, whether large or small, is greatly appreciated. Donations may be given online at www.zionshope.org or by calling us toll-free at 1-888-781-9466. Stay informed and see the latest from Zion's Hope by liking us on Facebook, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and following us on Twitter.